Retired Rear Admiral Mike Studeman is a decorated military commander whose 35-year career took him to assignments all around the globe. He is the former commandant for U.S. Naval Intelligence, and prior to that, he served as the Director for Intelligence at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command from 2019 to 2022. He is an expert on China, on the People's Liberation Army, and Chinese political warfare. We talk about how U.S. intelligence views the strategic situation in the Western Pacific, what President Xi Jinping's firing of 2 top generals from the Chinese Military Commission portends for Beijing's ambitions against Taiwan, and what the U.S. intelligence community needs to do to meet the moment. I'm also pleased to announce that SESP will be hosting our AI Plus Intelligence Summit on 9 April in Washington, D.C. We will be bringing together leaders from the intelligence community, industry, and academia to talk about the future of intelligence in the age of AI. I hope that you'll join us. Like all SESP events, admission is free. You can find registration details at www.scsp.ai. And as always, your comments on our podcast are most welcome. Please email us at inteledge@scsp.ai. Enjoy the episode. Admiral Mike Studeman, welcome to Intelligence at the Edge. I am so glad that you could be here.
I'm so glad to be here too, and I can't wait for the really tough questions to come from your chair over there.
We'll try to only serve up softballs. We've actually been eager to have you on the show for some time, and as luck would have it, we're now getting you on in early February, almost in the immediate aftermath of some stunning developments in Beijing with the surprise removal of the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission. But we'll get to that in a second. Lots to talk about. And I thought what we could do to start with is maybe get your perspective on China's now, pretty mature drive for PLA modernization. And I'll share my personal view that I still think the average American doesn't yet fully understand the extent to which the PLA has not only grown its forces, but also improved its military forces. Not just bombs and bullets and warships and aircraft, but the quality of their execution. But I would be curious if you could help us set the stage in understanding China's current military power.
Yeah, I think what we've seen with PLA modernization, it's been one of the fastest developments in human history. You can go back and take a look at some of the other empires that were built, nation states that came back, like Germany after World War I, and China's right up there in terms of the pace, the tempo, the quality of the military buildup over a unit of time. And, unfortunately, at the critical period when they were making more and more breakthroughs, we had a distracted eye because we were taking care of what were rightly some pressing threats from terrorists. And so we were going after Al-Qaeda and ISIS and things like that. And we always had a weather eye on China, but frankly, a lot of our energies were consumed elsewhere. And so I do think that we didn't have the kind of ongoing conversation that the government needed to have with the people of America and our allies and partners about what this meant, the why, how it fit into China's larger ambitions, and what we should do about it, and what do we really care about with regard to another country's defensive systems. Does it have some kind of offensive capability, which is single-threaded for a contingency or two? Is it regional? Is it global? Those debates were going on in the intelligence community for some time, and for too long, actually. The conclusion was maybe this is just a regional challenge that we have to deal with, and that's actually not the case. China needs to be considered in terms of its global interests and its intent to have a military eventually protect those developmental interests globally.
Admiral, you were formerly director of the Naval Intelligence, also the intelligence director for Indo-Pacific Command. So you've had a close eye on Chinese military power for a long time, particularly the Navy. And I think I've read you say that the Navy is absolutely a peer of the U.S. Navy. What did you mean by that?
Normally, when I say that, I talk about the military being a peer to the United States, particularly when you factor in any geography with regard to we're not going to go, decide to meet up at the Arctic and then go fight. I mean, if there is a dust up with the Chinese, it's going to be over the interests that we have and that they have in the Western Pacific by and large. And so it's a home game for them, it's an away game for us. But if you take a look at the quality and the numbers, the volume, the capacity of the PLA, it's truly awesome. And you don't want to overblow the threat, but you don't want to underrate it either. And frankly, those who are still using the words near peer need to study up more on the kind of threat that we see today. Many of these platforms, the capabilities that we find, cyber, electronic warfare, and space, the list goes on. They are world class. They are well trained on their equipment, and they do way more practicing in terms of live fires than we do. And
Hmm.
guess what? Their op tempo is very high because they're being asked to do essentially non-war military activities that include the pressure tactics in the East China Sea, around Taiwan, South China Sea, and
Yeah.
elsewhere. And so, look, we've got a real capability that's strengthened itself over the years and would present a dire challenge for any military or combination of militaries that would clash with the PLA.
And their military power is connected to their broader national power, their economic strength, their political and diplomatic strength. I think you have talked about China's got great latent power and is finding ways to convert it into, I think you used the term ready power.
That's right.
And again, could you explain what you meant by that? Because it sounds, pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I think that the main thing people miss with regard to rating and the traditional indices of national power is to say, well, my GDP or my resources or my population are X, Y, and Z, and they're superior to this nation or that nation. And what they forget is that what a nation spends its GDP on really matters. And China has chosen to spend a lot of its capability in its security forces that include both the domestic side of it, right? People's Armed Police, and through to the PLA, in addition to highly capable diplomatic power, global reach of their information power, right? Their growing techno-economic capabilities on there. And so the Chinese have a grand strategy. They're building up their comprehensive national power. They rate it. We don't know exactly what their criteria is. We have some sense for it, but they are rating their comprehensive national power against other nations, especially the United States, to see how they would match up. And it's meaningful to them in terms of how ambitious their goals should be, how confident they should be in moving out on their marks to be able to achieve some of the ambitions that they have as part of their rejuvenation and as part of their intent to take center stage in the world again, right? And so they are actively doing this with integrated civil military fusion, approaches. And we, on the other hand, I think are too often stovepiping our problem related to China as only, say, a military problem primarily over Taiwan,
Mhm.
and we're going to fight the battle of the Taiwan Strait. This is a misdiagnosis of the nature of the challenge and a misdiagnosis of what really we ought to be thinking about as a country. The fact that our government doesn't explain it very well to the American people means that we have 1,000 different views about China. And so we haven't got a unitary diagnosis of the problem, the challenge, and we certainly don't have the right kind of prescriptions, I think, yet for how to deal with it. We've tried various different things, but in the end, military power, to your point, is only one component of comprehensive national power, and the Chinese are adamant about going through that conversion process. When we talk about the defense industrial base and we're
Hmm.
so desperate to rebuild it, it's because we forgot that that conversion ring entails the industrial base to convert your latent power into your ships or your aircraft or your munition power, right? And so we let that, frankly, become too efficient and too small, too fragile,
Yeah.
right? And so, in almost every way, if you're talking about diplomatic, informational, military, et cetera, the Chinese never forgot that having the conversion ring with all the capabilities inside of it to leap you from latent to real and ready deployable power is the challenge.
What you said a moment ago about Americans sort of focus or hyper focus on a Taiwan contingency sort of resonates with me because when I think about, like, say, Volt Typhoon and some of the cyber intrusions that China's perpetrated against our country in recent years and that we've talked about in previous podcasts. I mean, yes, they can be effective and useful in a contingency, but they seem to sure have broader purpose in mind with the scope of some of what they've done. So, how do you understand, or how do you explain the ambitions for China's military power?
Well, I think that ultimately, having our national security strategy and our national defense strategy focus on deterrence, and I think what they mean is don't move against Taiwan or Japan or the Philippines in an overtly military fashion,
Hmm.
and then we're going to stabilize and have an economic relationship with them. Totally misses the point with regard to understanding China. China aims to expand its political power. Its aim is to be able to earn influence all over the planet. In earning that influence, they're able to shape the norms, the preferences, the values, right, of the world community. And they've been very successful in expanding their political power through the overarching umbrella of political warfare, right? So in play today, political warfare takes many forms, right?
Hmm.
It's simply the best way to understand political warfare is expanding your political power at the expense of others and using all means to do it, but short of war, right? So that's today's environment. So I think we have a nation on the United States side that thinks, look, if I can just deter the battle of the Taiwan Strait,
Hmm.
I win, right? In fact, you can lose the peace because you haven't identified China's real strategy, which is an ever expanding arc of influence, to be able to get it access to markets, to resources, right? And to outcompete other countries, but especially the United States, which has a grand weakening effect if they're able to succeed in that ambition for the United States, and a grand strengthening effect, for the Chinese. They have a dominance sort of perspective here, where if they are able to have the unprecedented comprehensive national power, then they are able to not only secure the regime against any kind of threats, this is inside out thinking, but
Hmm.
they also can drive a decision in their direction, which can advantage them anywhere on any major issue of concern.
That's insightful. Thank you. Um, we talked a little bit about maybe U.S. misperceptions. Just briefly, how do you appreciate sort of the regional reaction to China's rise?
Well, clearly, China's military modernization and its other activities have created great anxiety, a great deal of concern. And so, small nations that are and middle sized nations that are there on the periphery have a lot to be concerned about. I mean, China's not over there, China's not just there. China's inside each of those countries,
Hmm.
right? They have economic relations. They have the media, informational resources. They've bought political and business elites, right, to cooperate on a whole range of issues. And so China's approach is to do these things as a matter of practice, just as a daily sort of approach to be able to earn more traction and influence inside societies. So thinking about the China problem only in terms of trade and a battle for the Taiwan Strait is an necessary but insufficient way to take a look at this. And when you see threats that come, to these nations that are close, but also here in the United States, so halfway around the world,
Hmm.
it would demand of you to actually take measures to protect yourself in the homeland, inside out, and to prepare for contingencies and to deter. So, shaping and influencing are key parts of China's strategy. Why aren't shaping and influencing key parts of our strategy too?
That's a great point. You're coming on the show in the wake of this kind of blockbuster announcement out of Beijing about the removal of the vice chairman, General Zhang. Um, let's talk about this a little bit, and I'm curious your analysis of what happened. I imagine our former colleagues back in ONI and CIA have been scrambling over the last few days to kind of read the tea leaves. We're not privy to that traffic that they're reading that's classified, but your long experience to this, what drove this action by Xi to remove his top general?
Yeah, the chattering classes are, providing every explanation that you have. Look, I don't think it's, sharing nuclear, technology or secrets. I don't, corruption is endemic. Cash for rank is just part of the PLA. So anybody could be fired for being involved in cash for rank kinds of things. So corruption. But look, when you read some of the language there that's written about sort of trampling on the authority of the
Yeah.
chairman and all, those are really strong words.
You're referring to the PLA Daily
That's right.
editorial that
That's
explained
right.
the ouster.
And so when it comes to that, it's really you're starting to focus in on the real dynamic, which I think is this issue of how much power Xi Jinping has rights to have in the CMC and what the PLA will or will not do. Will they follow every word, every direction? There is their debate. And in that debate, is the CMC stopping Xi Jinping from pursuing certain things that he wants the military to do? And he sees that, in fact, this is a challenge to his chairmanship. And I think ultimately the answer lies somewhere close to this that, Zhang Youxia, General Liu, and lots of the others who have been purged, right? There are only two people that are on the CMC right now,
Hmm.
right? Xi and the general that's left who is a political commissar for the rocket forces. So they've been purged, and I think primarily because there were concerns about maybe being too aggressive. And I think these military officers, some of whom had, some combat experience from their Vietnam combat operations in 1979, that saw, how quickly you can lose. In their case, the Chinese lost 50,000, plus soldiers, how devastating a Taiwan scenario might be for them. And
Hmm.
so I would suspect that they issued some cautionary advice about what the PLA could or couldn't do, not just in terms of, the contingency itself, let's say a full-on blockade or a war, but even in terms of how much force to use around Taiwan or in the South China Sea, maybe along the Indian border and other things. And I would suspect that maybe she was tired of the overcautious, perhaps nature, maybe that's how he saw it, of his military commission members, and was looking for more yes men that would simply do his bidding.
Mm.
And I think that has sort of more play. There is that letter that was claimed to have been what Zhang Youxia wrote in December of 2025. We thought that maybe the walls were closing in and she was going to, remove him. By and large, most people think it's fake, although there are some compelling elements of it. Some of the dynamics described in that letter wouldn't be too off the mark. So I will suspend judgment on that one. We'll see how that goes, whether or not that's actually a genuine article or whether or not that was something that, was produced from another source.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that your interpretation or an interpretation is that she was dissatisfied with the conservative nature of General Zhang and Liu and thought they were not being aggressive enough with regard to his military strategies, including with regard to Taiwan.
Yeah, I think so. I also hold out that we should be looking to see whether or not there are other dynamics at work.
Okay.
Those other dynamics include whether or not Xi Jinping may have thought that these elders inside the CMC had different expectations of Xi's use of power across the board, and whether or not it relates to the fourth term. So as Xi Jinping goes up for his fourth term, that's the fall of 2027.
27. Right.
We're in 2026. Some of those PLA that had doubts about whether or not Xi Jinping was using too much force on the world scene, right? And was turning nations away, creating security dilemmas, creating strengthened militaries on China's periphery in terms of Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, Australia, et cetera. That those people who may have thought that way might have been able to impact the prospects of getting that fourth term. If you clean house now,
Mm-hmm.
you get rid of some of these
Yeah.
revered figures, you bring in the yes men, and by the time your plenum rolls around in the fall of 2027, you have essentially guaranteed PLA support for him carrying on from.
So this is all sort of preamble
Could be,
for the
right?
plenum. Yes, and it's it's worth remembering that the Central Military Commission was its collective leadership, right? Well, was until this
It's
move.
about as unitary leadership as you'll ever find. I mean,
Yeah.
the centralization of power under Xi Jinping in every respect, right, is very clear. The consensus making decision, processes have really gone by the wayside.
Yeah. And specifically, what do you think this means for a Taiwan scenario? Does it
Well, I'm
increase
more
the
concerned, and the
yeah?
Taiwans are more concerned for a good reason. If you have, less restraint on Xi Jinping's ambition, that ambition is very clear, right? He has looked at Taiwan and said this is an essential part of rejuvenation, that we aim to have by 2049. So that's 23 years from now. That's not. That doesn't mean he's going to wait till 2048 to resolve the Taiwan. He's putting pressure on now to try to crack that and get it on the right path and have some resolution, ideally under his tenure, right? And so he is changing the status quo all the time. He's creating conditions that are making for a more oppressive environment around Taiwan. He is trying to shape the way that the average Taiwan citizen or the average Taiwan politician thinks about their prospects. And so there's an ongoing cognitive war. There's psychological warfare in play every single day with these multi-domain pressure tactics that the Chinese are using, right? At the end, you want your enemy defeated in his mind
Yeah.
before and ideally without having to use force, right? So this is what this is all about. And if you're in the PLA and you have some concerns about that, well, if you're Xi Jinping and you have the power, well, it's time to sweep those people off the game board and bring in others who can be part of this sort of pressuring campaign that's going on that does have a specific political aim in mind, assimilate Taiwan back in the fold. You could have read the tea leaves a year or even 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, the number of people that he's purged has exceeded anything that Mao Zedong has ever done. And so some of this is maybe, stopping factions from building. There's a whole idea of second mountaintops and third mountaintops. You don't want to create another mountaintop led by a very senior figure. So you're constantly raising other mountains that could grow. There's sort of a factional political thing that's always in play, I think, in China. But this goes far beyond that. The number of people and the spread across all of the major services and arms, et cetera, has really washed away, I think, almost an entire generation of folks. And now young bloods who may be more hot-headed, rash, who haven't had real combat experience, who want to prove themselves and are willing to say yes to Xi Jinping on anything. That's the real fear, I think, that people are talking about now, is that there's nothing that stands in the way between Xi and his own ambitions. There is fear that's kind of in the body politic now, the world community, with regard to, what unrestrained leaders could do and what they're willing to do to accomplish their prime goals. If you are taking a look at timing, people say 2027's going to be it. And they're like, maybe judging that this cleaning house in the CMC means that 2027 in the spring, you're going to have a blockade or an invasion. And I think that's wrong, right? I think you'll see more severe pressure tactics all the time. They're going to break more things that used to be the norm, and they'll continue to drive closer into Taiwan. There's a two-handed approach, an outside-in one and an inside-out one, which actually tries to co-opt insiders within the Taiwan political establishment, as well as, to set up, assassins, saboteurs,
Mm-hmm.
cooperative agents there. So it's a multifaceted approach. But Xi Jinping is probably not going to risk seeking a final resolution on Taiwan until he gets his fourth term. Right. That means that there's a less of a likelihood that he's going to move out in 2027. If that gamble fails, then he won't get his fourth term. See what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
he's not gonna onboard a lot of risk there, particularly if it's a protracted event, right? So he wants to bank the fourth term, right? So he can be approved in the plenum, and then he'll be approved for a presidency in the March of 2028. After that, depending on the U.S. factor, this is a central factor with regard to Taiwan, depending on our willingness to support what our alliance system looks like, what our president believes, then he may be more tempted to do something even more significant, right? So
Mm.
people talking about when to think about the greatest danger. I've always held that the back half, and particularly the last few years of the 2020s and the early 2030s, are the window, the period of greatest danger on this particular issue.
And how do you think she views himself as a leader and the relationship he wants to have with the military? I mean, should we interpret the shakeup of the CMC as he's going to take more of a hands-on, even operational role in directing PLA activities, or does he still see himself as more a political figure and he will find a new substitute for General Zhang who will execute his will?
Well, first of all, he's an ultra, micromanager extraordinaire. He has made himself, the leading group, head for so many different things. He's wanted to have the hands-on on anything important here. So it's not surprising to see that he also is making sure that only he sort of
I
controls
see.
what's going on there. I think you'll find cooperative, personalities that are there. The question is what kind of skill level they might bring to the CMC. This red versus expert issue, does he bring in people that are more red, like loyal, ideologically sound and reliable? How much expertise does he want? So I think a lot of China watchers are going to be paying close attention to whether or not he brings in more people into the CMC that have, experience in the Eastern military region and the theater there, maybe particular skill sets. The Southern Theater takes care of counter-intervention forces. Does he bring in a few of those? Is it going to be the rocket forces, folks? And I think people will read into that. Whatever the complexion is, you're going to absolutely have to have the loyalty card checked. But what kind of expertise and experience now sits in that grouping? That would be very telling with regard to what Xi's intentions may be.
Okay, well, let's watch that
Yeah.
closely. So let's talk about the IC
The
and its
IC,
posture.
yeah. So
How do you
I
view it?
think that the IC is, in large part, responsible for making sure that we had the most informed decisions that our country has made on very significant issues. They have been unheralded heroes. They don't expect a lot of public accolades, but I do think that we need to give credit where it's due. We've gone through very volatile periods that have ranged from crisis to war, and the intelligence community has delivered incredible value to the president and to combatant commanders and to others. So, I can't say enough about them. At the same time, the IC is a big, heavy, cumbersome, slow-moving thing, like any bureaucracy. And frankly, the ODNI has been playing a sort of coordination role over time, but not a directive role, right? The
Mhm.
director of national intelligence isn't. would be how I would capture it, right? The director wants to have consensus, needs to have the buy-in of the CIA director and the NSA director for anything. And if they have any reservations, they have veto power, essentially. And so I think we've had a weak sort of capstone entity on top that really hasn't driven the intelligence community where it needed to go, um, particularly when bureaucratic interests of individual agencies were at stake, right?
Hmm.
And so that's number one. That's something that we probably need to take a look at now. Who has more power, Tulsi Gabbard, right? Or you take a look at the CIA director right now. I think people would have different views on that. But I think the power center is more with the CIA now than with the DNI. The do not invite, right?
Right.
Equip there. And so that's point one. Point two, on speed. Look, we knew that you had a technological revolution, for years. We've been slow to adopt artificial intelligence capabilities. We haven't revamped ourselves in the modern age. I sensed all along, even when I was more middling officer, that we were not valuing open sources, whether they call them commercially available or publicly available information.
Very true.
The fact of the matter is that the classified, highly technical stuff that you get from a human source or a technical source doesn't matter. That's a smaller fraction of the overall body of knowledge that exists on the planet.
Sure.
Therefore,
And shrinking.
that's right, and shrinking. And therefore, you need to make sure you can harness this enlarged body that's ever growing and enrich it with your, highly special intelligence, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And many line analysts, they may have done a lot of reading early in their careers, but they tend to be working so obsessively on what they have that they're not always connected into the latest books and the monographs and the essays and the think tank discussions from other notable experts, that many of whom actually have on the ground experience, that are
Yep.
doing primary source collection, interviewing people in the know. And it's amazing to watch this sort of ivory tower syndrome begin to occur inside the intelligence community. So I think we have more approaches that are kind of getting us down the road. I worry about the speed with which that we're going to evolve to be able to truly say that we're ready to go, that we're truly an all source intelligence agency, if you're one of those, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's only been for many years partial source intelligence. And I think it's hurt us by not having a fulsome view of a lot of different things. We have not emphasized cultural, historical elements, that we would have needed to make even smarter decisions about,
Yeah.
Deploying ourselves in foreign lands, right? Read 3 books about a nation before you invade it, kind of thing. So I do think that there are shortfalls overall. Wouldn't trade them for the world, but we're going to have to figure out how we're going to incorporate advanced technology into new tradecraft and new ways of doing business. Right now, people are so frustrated. Like the National Security Agency, on any given day, it delights or disgusts, right? And so if you can't get it, right, it's there, but you can't get it because there are not enough reports officers to create a report on something, right? Guess where they're going to go? They're going to press the easy button and they're going to hire a company that has the data that's going to essentially be doing the collection that NSA already has done, right? Or may have overlapped. They're so frustrated dealing with the NSA that they look for alternative sources. So NSA is going to have to figure out how it's going to revamp maybe its executive orders, some of its directives, how it does business, because doing the same thing that they're doing now, I think, won't get them to the state of high relevance that they're going to need to be to serve the country well.
And it's absolutely stunning what many private sector companies are able to deliver by mining what is now publicly available. Some of it you have to pay for, but there's a tremendous amount in commercially available information, publicly available information that intelligence services have access to, but aren't always taking full advantage of.
That's right.
And I think your point about so the preference for the highly compartmented top secret material. I was guilty of that myself during my career, and it's a pathology that we need to get over.
I think that's right. And there are some eye-watering services that some companies offer that are doing collection of a sort that we have a hard time doing, right? There are means that we have our hands kind of sometimes tied behind our back with some forms of collection, and other companies don't. But the idea is that you can anonymize. I mean, you can take out certain things and let metadata and your algorithms and your agentic operations be able to derive the insight that you're looking for without necessarily obsessing on, did I collect a US citizen name somewhere in this batching, this collection effort, right? There's a way to protect that and still get
Sure.
insight. And I'm afraid we're so leery of doing that that we restrict ourselves in a way that's truly, limiting. So as awesome as NSA's databanks are here, as much as they have to offer, we're going to need to find some revolutionary aspects of how to incorporate best of breed companies that are truly complementary and additive to what the intelligence community and the partnership is where the beauty and the magic really will lie,
Yeah.
not just government doing it all itself.
On the China target, look, I remember, friends of mine from the China office years ago. I'm thinking 15, even longer years ago. Were walking around Washington with the now infamous scary China briefing. Right? They did a fantastic job. We're well ahead of the game of pointing to China's increasing military power back at that time. Yet, in other aspects, I think we're not as well positioned to collect or understand what's happening in China. The things that leap to mind are, the DeepSeek surprise from last year
Yeah.
around this time. Understanding what's happening in Chinese AI labs or quantum labs or other technology companies or settings, we're still not, well positioned for that because I think all their collection systems are designed to try to penetrate the Politburo or understand what's happening in the PLA. And the other is sort of the social factor. This is something you raised a few minutes ago, but what is sort of the mood of the average Chinese, and how do they view Xi's leadership, and what does that mean for the economy and for the direction of the country?
I think that's exactly right. And I do think that there are ways that we can tackle this. I do think we're going to have to rely on, others that have the ability to help where we might have shortfalls. But look, the R&D base of China is a gigantic mammoth of a thing, like clusters and clusters of things that are spread out all over China. It's a hard target anyway, but trying to go after so many of them, right, leaves you to, just cyber exploitation or signals intelligence, whatever. We're going to need to use all forms of intelligence, but also the open source side of it to be able to understand what's going on. Here's my view. My view is that the intelligence community has had this third rail mindset with regard to collecting economic intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Certainly has.
Security is going to depend, every nation's security is going to depend on their economies. We are in an economic warfare environment, right? And the sources of economic power aren't just through sort of technical developments, but a whole array of capabilities.
Right.
If the intelligence community says, that's not me, I don't collect economic intelligence, then they're blinding themselves. Essentially, they're going to be walking through the 21st century with their blinkers on. There is no way that you can understand context or what's really the nature of the threat, or as you said, to avoid surprise, to get the earliest faint traces of something you should
Yeah.
worry about, without having more investment in people that know things about business and economies and are able to find out creative ways to be able to understand what's happening in somebody's ecosystem over there. And it's not just sort of adversary countries, it's other ecosystems too. Because guess what? If there's a huge new, revelatory capability being developed in Germany, you can be sure that the Chinese are going to be infiltrating that to be able to get, insights to steal the IP. So you've got to have more of a 360-degree God's eye view of what's happening in multiple economies as they grow and develop over time. We have decided, look, I'm just doing strategic intelligence. I need to tell the president what Xi Jinping's next move is going to be,
Right.
or I'm going to follow the military patterns and operations and tell you what the capabilities are of this missile system, or this submarine, or this aircraft. And I think we're going to face a reckoning that's going to come through ignorance and more surprises if we don't get our act in gear and finally commit to putting a substantial amount of investment from the IC into the kind of skill sets we need with talent and people, but
Mhm.
also you're going to learn your insights through working with other partners in the business community. And so rethinking what those relationships look like and how to have a strong interchange that's dynamic and ever evolving, but open lines of communication that have to exist.
In part because the intelligence community, certainly, even the U.S. government writ large, probably in many areas doesn't have the expertise to even ask the right questions about what's happening in a lab in Germany or a lab in China, because the cutting edge of innovation is increasingly happening in the private sector. So that two-way dialogue with the private sector is vital if we're going to be able to position ourselves to protect the nation's national security, certainly, but also our national competitiveness, which is going to be increasingly important in the years ahead.
I will point out one other aspect of this that I think we're kind of in general agreement, but you would be, I think, naive to think that the Chinese, even the Russians, others, aren't going to develop things that are going to be superior to whatever the United States has, particularly as China becomes a stronger techno-economic superpower, particularly as China and Russia are working together and may share some of these things. Therefore, in order to understand the state of technology, the state of the art, it may not be in the so-called innovative US, nobody can beat us on innovation. It may be somewhere else where they've actually already harvested what we know on a certain topic, which they're very good at. They live they inhabit our ecosystem, and they are completely sucking and vacuuming what we know. Then they add it to what they are doing, right? And they're going to be, I think, developing things that are going to be even more cutting edge than what we have. Not in everything, but in some things. We need the intelligence that goes into those areas too. And then what do you do with that intelligence? Do you just tell the president we're kind of losing in this
Yeah.
area of quantum, as an example? Or do we actually have a new protocol, which has been verboten as well for the IC, that we can share those insights with these 10 US companies? They all get equitable amount. They may not learn every source and method, but they learn the key takeaway.
Yeah.
Here's a key thing on, quantum communications, right? I don't think we have set up that protocol. I think we're very uncomfortable with the idea that we may have to do business intelligence for American companies. But in the 21st century, where economic warfare is the mark of our age, not doing it means that I think we're going to fall behind in critical areas.
Yeah, I think there have been two sources of reticence. What happens to the 11th and 12th company that doesn't get the information? They were maybe too small or ignored for whatever reason. Is that going to be viewed as fair or not? And then you're right. I mean, collecting business intelligence, putting programs, people at risk, is not something that the U.S. intelligence community has been used to doing. But I agree with you that this is time when we need to think about those paradigms and whether or not they need to be changed.
That's right.
Admiral, you've written a book. We didn't have a chance to talk about it today so much, or I'd love to maybe have another conversation with you about it. But Might of the Chain, it's a book on leadership, and I thought if I could get from you a thought or two, maybe drawn from the book, for the young people that we have listening and watching this podcast who are thinking about embarking on a career in the intelligence business or in the national security arena, what are some pieces of advice drawn from the book or other places that you have for them?
Thanks for mentioning it. So I wrote the book Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity, as soon as I retired. It came out in 2024. Actually, they just translated into Mandarin. And so that they're actually sitting in Taiwan bookstores right now, which is
Great.
very weird to think about. And I did a special forward for the Taiwanese people. But, one of the chapters talks about, courage. And I think that anybody that joins the intelligence community today is going to have to be a very brave soul, because I do think it's getting harder and harder for facts to be shepherded to where they need to go for action, with decision makers who may be very difficult to persuade or may have a completely different view on something. So I do think the moral courage thing about how you actually deliver insight when the costs may be pretty scary to contemplate. So that's what I worry. I worry deeply today about whether or not there's politicization of intelligence, whether or not intelligence is getting its way through, or how persuasive it is. So we need to have courageous people in the intelligence community stand up for what is right and true. Look, we don't always have the ground truth, because the ground truth is actually very difficult to find. Our job in intelligence is to explain what we know, what we don't know, what we assess, and always distinguish the three. That's the Powell principle, right?
Right.
And I think that's still good today. But it's becoming harder and harder for people to actually execute even that doctrine in today's very, very challenging and emotionally fraught environments where there are political biases that exist here. And so, look, my view is, don't come into the intelligence community if you don't intend to be brave. If you are ready for a real challenge, please come in. We could use those talents here. I believe that ultimately, people that do their jobs right in intelligence can be convincing and persuasive, but it's going to take people who are willing to stand up to people that may be more senior, that may have more controls over their fate, and still be willing to call a spade a spade. If you're willing to step in and deal with the world as it is and do the best you can in that world and provide the clearest insights for the best decisions that we need to make as a country, please come in, because this is the environment for you.
Well said. Admiral Mike Studeman, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your service to the country, and thanks for continuing to be a China expert. I'd love to have you back on the show at a later date to kind of check in on where China is militarily. Thank you so much.
Honored to be here. Thanks again for the conversation.
All right.